In the fog-shrouded hills of Appalachia, a woman stood before the crumbling gates of St. Agatha's Mercy Hospital, about to make the worst investment of her life. What started as a simple real estate transaction took a shocking turn when she discovered the building's power was still on. 40 years after it had supposedly closed forever, Lydia Grant wasn't your typical property developer. For 8 years, she had spent her life as a trauma nurse in emergency rooms across 3 states, known for her ability to stay calm when others panicked and her refusal to accept comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. When she found patient records dated months after the hospital's official closure, she had no idea she was walking into a nightmare that had been feeding on human consciousness for 80 years. Lydia pressed deeper into the building's secrets, uncovering whispered pleas from files that shouldn't be able to speak, discovering that would lead to the revelation of her own genetic modification and her father's role in crimes that transcended death itself. What began as an abandoned building inspection would become a battle against a biological horror disguised as medical progress. The town of Grayford would never be the same after Lydia Grant chose to destroy everything her father had built, freeing hundreds of trapped souls and sacrificing the only family connection she had left. The hospital breathed, the files whispered, and somewhere in the darkness, beneath St. Agatha's Mercy, something that was no longer quite human was waiting for the woman who had been designed from birth to complete its terrible work. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She bought an abandoned hospital, then discovered something no one could believe to this day. The deed was still warm in her hand when she first noticed the lights. Dim yellow squares glowing through fog-covered windows in a building that had supposedly been dark for 40 years. But here was the strange part. The power company had no record of service to St. Agatha's Mercy Hospital since 1945. Lydia Grant stood in the gravel parking lot, holding the paperwork that should have represented her simplest investment yet. The building loomed above her on its hill, like a cathedral of suffering, all grey stone and Gothic arches, its turrets reaching into the low Appalachian clouds. Yet something was wrong with the story she had been told. In the town clerk's office that morning, Sheriff Tom Halloran had watched her sign the final documents with eyes that held too much knowledge and too little welcome. "The building's been empty since the war ended," he had said, not meeting her gaze. "Bank foreclosed on it back in '47. You'll find it needs considerable work, but the lights were on. Not all of them, just enough to trace the outline of hallways through the gathering dusk. Enough to suggest that someone or something still moved through those corridors." Lydia climbed the stone steps, her boots echoing against granite worn smooth by decades of desperate feet. Patients carried on stretchers, doctors running toward emergencies, families arriving too late to say goodbye. The hospital's main entrance stood beneath a carved stone banner that read "Mercy for all who enter." Someone had painted over the word mercy with something that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The front doors were unlocked. They swung inward with a groan that seemed to come from deep within the building's bones, and the smell that rolled out made Lydia's stomach turn. Not decay exactly, though that was present. Something else underneath it, something organic and warm, like a body kept just above room temperature. The lobby stretched before her, a vast space of cracked marble floors and water-stained walls, where painted murals showed scenes of healing that now looked like mockeries. A nurse tending to a child whose face had been worn away by water damage. A doctor holding an X-ray up to light that no longer existed. Reception desks stood empty, their surfaces covered in dust patterns that showed handprints, recent ones, as if someone had been searching through drawers just days ago. Lydia set her briefcase down and pulled out her flashlight, though she hardly needed it. The overhead lights hummed with electric life, flickering occasionally, but never quite going dark. She walked to the reception desk and found a logbook still lying open, its pages yellowed with age. The final entry was dated September 3rd, 1945, written in careful nurse's handwriting. Final patient transfer complete. Building closure scheduled for dawn. May God forgive us for what we had to do, but according to every deed, every bank record, every historical document Lydia had reviewed, St. Agatha's Mercy had closed its doors in August of that year, not September. Someone had kept the hospital running for at least another month, long after the official closure, long after the staff had supposedly departed, long after the town had moved on. When Lydia lifted the logbook, she noticed something else. The pages beneath had impressions pressed deep into the paper, as if someone had written with enough force to leave marks several pages down. She held the page up to one of the glowing overhead lights, squinting at the faint impressions that revealed fragments of words separated by desperate spacing. Experimental wing, transfer unauthorized, patients unaware, disposal protocol. The hospital had been keeping 2 sets of records. As she walked through the ground floor corridors, more questions accumulated like the dust that coated every surface. The hallways were lined with wheelchairs, dozens of them arranged in neat rows, as if waiting for patients who would never return. But the chairs weren't dusty. Their chrome frames gleamed dully in the electric light, and when Lydia touched one, the rubber handles were still slightly soft, not cracked and brittle the way 40-year-old rubber should be. She found the children's ward on the 2nd floor, following a hand-painted sign decorated with faded cartoon animals. The double doors stood open, revealing a long room filled with small beds, each one made up with clean white sheets. Toys sat on bedside tables exactly as they might have been left by playing children. A wooden train, a cloth doll with button eyes, a set of jacks scattered across a bed as if interrupted mid-game. Lydia's hands trembled as she walked between the beds. This was wrong. This was all wrong. Abandoned buildings didn't look like this. They were violated by weather and scavengers, stripped of copper wire and anything valuable, claimed by animals and decay. They didn't look like everyone had simply vanished one ordinary afternoon, leaving everything frozen in a moment of innocent normalcy. At the far end of the ward, she found something that made her breath catch. A bulletin board covered in children's drawings, the paper brown with age, but the images still visible. Stick-figure families holding hands, crude houses with smiling suns, and in the corner, one drawing different from all the others. A building on a hill, surrounded by trees, but underneath the building, someone had drawn red lines extending deep into the ground like roots, and at the end of each root, a tiny figure curled into a ball. When she turned to leave, the lights flickered. Just once, but enough to cast the room into momentary darkness. In that brief blackness, Lydia could have sworn she saw something move at the end of the hallway beyond the ward doors. A shadow that didn't match any of the furniture, human-shaped but wrong somehow, its proportions slightly off. She walked quickly toward the exit, her footsteps echoing too loudly in the empty corridor. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed dim for several seconds, long enough for Lydia to hear something else. A sound like breathing, but mechanical, rhythmic, coming from somewhere below her feet. The building itself seemed to be drawing air in and out, expanding and contracting around her like a living thing. She was nearly running by the time she reached the main staircase. The smart thing would be to leave, to come back tomorrow with contractors and witnesses, people who could confirm she wasn't losing her mind. But as she descended the stairs, something caught her eye. A door beneath the stairwell, half hidden in shadow, marked with a simple sign, Biocontainment Unit, authorized personnel only. The door was welded shut, not locked with a chain or padlock, but welded, metal fused to metal from the outside, as if someone had been desperate to ensure that whatever was inside could never get out, or perhaps that no one could ever get in. Lydia pressed her ear against the cold metal. The breathing sound was louder here, definitely coming from somewhere behind this door, somewhere deep in the hospital's basement. A steady rhythm like a heartbeat, patient and eternal. As she backed away from the door, the PA system crackled to life. The speakers must have been connected to the same mysterious power source that lit the building. because a voice whispered through the static. Small and young and terrified. "Don't turn the power off, please. We're still here." Lydia ran. She ran through the lobby, past the reception desk with its ominous logbook, through the front doors and down the stone steps. She ran until she reached her car, fumbling with her keys, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the door. She sat in the driver's seat, breathing hard, staring up at the hospital on its hill. Every window was lit now. Not just dim lights in scattered corridors, but blazing illumination, as if the building had come fully awake. And in one of the third-floor windows, she could see a small figure standing motionless, watching her. The smart thing would be to drive away and never come back. But Lydia had bought this hospital with everything she had left, every dollar salvaged from her failed nursing career and her father's tainted legacy. She had nowhere else to go. And something about that child's voice on the PA system, the desperate plea to keep the power on, wouldn't let her leave. She spent the night in the only motel in Grayford, a sagging structure off the main highway where the clerk looked at her with something like pity when she mentioned St. Agatha's. "You're the one who bought the hill," he said, not quite making it a question. Sheriff Halloran mentioned someone had finally taken it off the bank's hands. Lydia wanted to ask what he meant by the hill, as if the hospital and the land beneath it were somehow one entity. But exhaustion dragged at her bones, and she needed sleep before she could face whatever waited for her tomorrow. She dreamed of children's voices whispering in darkness, and roots growing deep into earth, and something vast and patient waiting beneath stone and soil, drawing power from sources that had nothing to do with electrical grids or coal-fired generators. Morning brought no comfort. Lydia woke to rain drumming against the motel window and the certainty that everything she had experienced the night before was real, not hallucinations brought on by stress, not tricks of light and shadow, real. She drove back to St. Agatha's with her toolbox, her camera, and a determination to catalogue every anomaly scientifically. If the hospital was somehow still functioning, there had to be a rational explanation. Underground power lines, squatters maintaining minimal electricity, something that made sense. But as she climbed the hill through morning fog, she knew she was lying to herself. Buildings didn't breathe. PA systems didn't carry the voices of children from hospitals closed before those children were born. And yet here she was, walking back towards something her instincts screamed at her to flee. In daylight, St. Agatha's looked more decrepit. Rain streaked the grey stone walls, and sections of roof showed gaps where tiles had fallen away. Vines climbed the turrets, and several windows on the ground floor were broken, their glass teeth jutting from wooden frames. This was what an abandoned building should look like, decaying, dead. But when Lydia pushed through the front doors, the lobby lights were still on, and the breathing sound was louder, definitely coming from somewhere beneath the foundation. She could feel it now, a subtle vibration through the soles of her boots, rhythmic and organic. She decided to start with the administrative wing, looking for answers in paperwork before venturing deeper into the building's mysteries. The hospital director's office was on the first floor, its door marked with a tarnished brass nameplate, Dr. Malcolm Reeve, chief surgeon. The office was exactly as it must have been left in 1945. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface covered in files and correspondence. Medical journals lined built-in bookshelves. Framed certificates hung on walls painted institutional green. Everything was covered in decades of undisturbed dust, except for one thing, the filing cabinet behind the desk. Its drawers showed fingerprints in the dust, recent ones, as if someone had been searching through files just days or maybe hours ago. Lydia approached it carefully, pulling out drawer after drawer. Each was filled with patient records from the 1940s, meticulously organized by date and illness, tuberculosis, pneumonia, war injuries, all the suffering that had filled this building during its operational years. But the bottom drawer was different. It was labeled Project Mercy in faded ink, and when Lydia pulled it open, she found files dated after the hospital's closure. September 1945, October 1945. The latest was dated March 1946, a full 7 months after St. Agatha's had supposedly shut down. She pulled out one of the files at random. Patient number 23, male, age 34, coal mining accident. The medical notes detailed a man who had arrived with severe spinal damage, paralyzed from the waist down. Standard treatment recommended. Extended care, pain management, eventual transfer to long-term facility. But underneath those standard notes, someone had written in different ink, volunteer selected for neural preservation trial, consent obtained via family proxy. Procedure scheduled for September 15th, 1945. There was more. Pages and pages of technical jargon about experimental treatments and consciousness preservation. But what made Lydia's blood run cold was the final note, dated October 1945, trial successful. Patient undergo 23 neural function maintained. Integrated into primary system. Biological markers stable. What the hell did that mean? Integrated into primary system. Lydia pulled out more files. Patient number 47, female, age 8, terminal illness. Patient number 89, male, age 52, stroke. Patient number 112, female, age 19, childbirth complications. Dozens of them, all with the same progression of notes. Standard treatment. Volunteer selected. Trial successful. Integrated into primary system. She photographed every page, her hands surprisingly steady despite the horror building in her chest. These weren't treatment records. They were something else. Documentation of experimentation. Evidence of crimes committed under the guise of medical care. When she closed the filing cabinet, she noticed something she had missed before. A door in the back wall of the office, hidden behind a tall bookshelf. The bookshelf was on wheels, designed to slide aside. Lydia pushed it carefully and it moved easily, as if someone maintained the mechanism. The door behind it was metal, like the bio-containment entrance downstairs, but this one wasn't welded shut. It was simply locked, with a keypad that glowed faintly red. Modern, far too modern for a building abandoned in 1945. She tried the obvious combinations. 1945, 2000, 1234. Nothing worked. But as she stood there trying to think, the building's breathing rhythm changed. The vibrations through the floor grew stronger, more insistent, and the overhead lights flickered in time with the pulse. That was when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Not the shuffling steps of something supernatural, but the sharp click of dress shoes against marble, purposeful and human. Lydia turned as a woman appeared in the doorway, tall and thin, wearing a coat better suited to cities than Appalachian towns. Her grey hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who made a career of knowing things others didn't. "You must be Lydia Grant," the woman said, not quite making it a question. "I'm Evelyn Brooks, town historian." She paused, glancing around the office with an expression that mixed nostalgia and disgust. "I've been expecting someone would eventually buy this place. I just didn't think they'd make it past the first night." Lydia slowly closed the filing cabinet drawer. "You know what happened here. It wasn't a question either." Evelyn's face confirmed everything. This woman knew. She had always known. Evelyn stepped into the office, and Lydia noticed she was careful not to touch anything, as if the hospital itself might be contagious. "My grandmother was a nurse here," she said quietly. "Worked the night shift in the surgical wing. She disappeared the same week the hospital closed. Officially, they said she ran off with some traveling salesman. But I found her journals 10 years ago. She didn't run. She tried to stop what they were doing, and they made her part of it." "Part of what?" Evelyn moved to the window, looking out at the fog-shrouded town below. Dr. Reeve was brilliant. Everyone said so. A pioneer in neurology, recruited by the government during the war to work on ways to save soldiers with catastrophic injuries. But somewhere along the way, he stopped trying to heal people and started trying to preserve them. To keep consciousness alive even after the body failed, Lydia thought of the files. The notes about neural preservation and integration. That's not possible, isn't it? Evelyn turned back and her eyes were haunted. "You've been in this building. You've felt it breathe." You've heard the voices. St. Agatha's didn't close, Miss Grant, it evolved. Reeve found a way to harness bioelectric energy from his experimental subjects to create a network of preserved consciousness that could power itself indefinitely. The hospital isn't haunted. It's inhabited by people who never got to die. The lights flickered violently, as if in response to Evelyn's words. From somewhere deep below, the breathing rhythm escalated, and Lydia could have sworn she heard voices layered beneath it, dozens of them, whispering in unison. "You need to leave," Evelyn said urgently, "before you wake it up completely, before it realizes you're connected." Connected. Lydia's voice came out sharp. "What are you talking about?" But Evelyn was already moving toward the door. "Ask yourself why your father was so desperate to keep you away from this place. Ask yourself why his company steered you toward any investment except this one." She paused in the doorway. "Look at the board of directors list in that filing cabinet. Look at the names of the men who funded Reeve's work." And then she was gone, footsteps echoing away down the corridor, leaving Lydia alone with the breathing building and questions that multiplied like cancer cells. Lydia turned back to the filing cabinet, hands shaking now, and pulled out the bottom drawer again. She dug past the patient files until she found what she was looking for. A folder labeled Funding and Administration. Inside was a photograph from 1944, showing a group of men in suits standing on the hospital steps. Dr. Reeve stood in the center, tall and gaunt, his smile holding no warmth. Around him, men in expensive clothes, the kind who made decisions about other people's lives from the safety of boardrooms and country clubs. And there, on the far right, younger but unmistakable, was her father. Thomas Grant, his signature already visible at the bottom of the photograph, scrawled across the note, "To Malcolm, may your work benefit humanity. The future thanks you." The photograph slipped from Lydia's fingers. Her father had funded this, had enabled it, had known what was being done in this hospital, and had supported it with family money. When she bent to pick up the photograph, she felt warmth radiating from it, impossible warmth, as if the image itself was alive. And as her fingers touched the paper, the lights in the office surged brighter, and a child's laughter echoed from somewhere above, pure and terrible in its innocence. Lydia stood frozen in Dr. Reeve's office, her father's photograph burning in her hand like an accusation. The laughter faded, but it left something worse in its wake. Silence. The breathing rhythm had stopped, and the building held itself utterly still, as if waiting to see what she would do next. She needed evidence, real undeniable evidence that she could take to authorities, to media, to anyone who might listen. The patient files were documentation, but they were also medical jargon that could be dismissed as experimental treatments from a different era. She needed something more visceral, more immediate, something that couldn't be explained away. The archives room was on the basement level, according to the building directory she had found near the lobby. Lydia descended the main staircase slowly, her flashlight cutting through shadows that seemed to resist the light. The breathing sound returned as she went deeper, growing louder with each step, until she could feel it resonating in her chest like a second heartbeat. The basement corridor stretched before her, lined with doors marked storage, maintenance, and morgue. The overhead lights here were dimmer, flickering more frequently, and the air was thick with moisture and that strange organic warmth she had noticed the day before. The archives room door stood open, not ajar but fully open, as if inviting her in, as if the hospital wanted her to see what it contained. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls, floor to ceiling, dozens of them, each labeled with date ranges spanning from the hospital's opening in 1923 through its supposed closure in 1945. But Lydia could see additional labels that had been added later, handwritten on strips of tape: Sadek 1945, Janjun 1946, and the most recent, dated just 3 months ago. 3 months. Someone had been maintaining these records 3 months ago. Lydia approached the nearest cabinet and pulled open a drawer at random. Inside were patient files, Thick folders filled with charts and notes and photographs of people who had passed through St. Agatha's doors, seeking healing and finding something else entirely. She reached for the first file, and the moment her fingers touched the manila folder, she heard it. A whisper, faint as breath but distinct. A voice emerging from the paper itself, desperate and pleading, "Help us, please, don't let them start again." Lydia jerked her hand back, her heart hammering. She stared at the file, then slowly reached for it again. The whisper returned immediately, the same words, the same desperate tone, as if the paper itself had recorded the patient's final plea and played it back for anyone who would listen. She pulled the file from the drawer and opened it with trembling hands. Patient to 68, female, age 42, chronic heart condition. The standard medical notes detailed treatment plans and medication schedules. But underneath, in that different ink she had learned to recognize, the terrible truth: volunteer selected for neural preservation trial. Consent obtained via family proxy. Trial successful. Patient to 68, neural function maintained. Integrated into primary system. And at the bottom of the page, a handwritten note that made Lydia's blood run cold. Subject retained awareness during integration. Unexpected but promising for consciousness preservation research. Recommend adjusting sedation protocols for future procedures. They had kept her conscious. They had integrated her into whatever system Dr. Reeve had created. And they had done it while she was aware enough to understand what was happening to her. Lydia pulled out more files, and each one whispered when touched. Dozens of voices, hundreds maybe, each one pleading, begging, asking questions that would never be answered. "Where am I? Why can't I move? Please let me die." The chorus of desperation built until Lydia wanted to slam the drawers shut and run. But something kept her there, kept her listening. Because these people deserved to be heard, she pulled out her tape recorder, hands shaking, and began documenting what she heard. If nothing else, she would have proof that something impossible was happening in this building. Proof that the scientific explanation she craved didn't exist. Because some horrors transcended science. The whispers came through clearly on the recording. Distinct voices overlapping like a congregation of the damned. But as Lydia played back the tape, she heard something new underneath the pleading. A pattern. The whispers were trying to tell her something specific, guiding her towards something. She followed the pattern like a trail of breadcrumbs, moving from cabinet to cabinet, pulling files that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Each whisper led to the next, and slowly a picture emerged. Dr. Reeve hadn't been working alone. He'd had support from a group of wealthy benefactors. Men who saw his research as a solution to their own mortality. Men who believed that consciousness could be preserved indefinitely if they could just perfect the integration process. And at the center of that group of benefactors, funding it all with family fortune made from coal and blood, was Thomas Grant, her father. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Lydia found his correspondence in a locked drawer that opened when she touched it, as if the hospital itself wanted her to see this. Letters detailing payments and progress reports. Photographs of him touring the surgical wing, shaking hands with Dr. Reeve, smiling beside equipment designed to strip consciousness from dying bodies and feed it into a vast organic network. One letter, dated August 1945, stood out. Malcolm. The government is threatening to shut down the project. Too many questions about patient consent and ethical oversight. I can secure additional private funding if you're willing to continue the work independently after the official closure. The preservation of human consciousness is worth any sacrifice. Destroy this letter after reading, but Dr. Reeve hadn't destroyed it. He'd kept everything, documenting his crimes with the meticulous care of a scientist who believed history would vindicate him. Lydia was about to leave the archives when she noticed one more filing cabinet, separate from the others, standing alone in the corner. It was newer than the rest, and its label made her stomach drop. Grant, Lydia Ann, subject profile. Her hands were numb as she approached it. The cabinet was locked, but when she touched the handle, it clicked open immediately, as if it had been waiting for her specifically. Inside was a single file, much thicker than the patient records, filled with documents that spanned her entire life. Birth records, school transcripts, medical history, her nursing license, and the documentation of the malpractice scandal that had ended her career. Everything was here, every moment of her life catalogued and analyzed. But the most disturbing documents were at the back. A genetic report dated 6 months before her birth, showing abnormalities in her mother's DNA, markers that shouldn't exist, modifications that suggested artificial intervention, and underneath, in her father's handwriting, subject shows successful integration of enhanced neural receptivity. Offspring should inherit traits necessary for next phase of project. Her mother had been part of the experiments, not as a doctor or a nurse, but as a patient. One of Dr. Reeves' early trials before he had perfected his preservation techniques. And Lydia herself was the result, genetically modified before birth, designed to be compatible with whatever system her father and Dr. Reeve had created. She wasn't just investigating the hospital's crimes. She was part of them, born from them. Her entire existence was evidence of how far they had been willing to go. The lights in the archives room suddenly blazed bright, and Lydia heard footsteps on the stairs above. Multiple sets of footsteps descending toward the basement with purposeful speed. She grabbed the file bearing her name and ran, moving deeper into the basement, away from the archives and toward a corridor she hadn't explored yet. Behind her, voices called out, "Miss Grant, we know you're down here. We just want to talk about your plans for the building." But Lydia recognized that tone, the false friendliness masking threat, the careful words of people who made problems disappear. She ran through twisting corridors, past rooms filled with old equipment and forgotten supplies, until she reached a dead end. The wall before her was solid stone, no doors, no way forward. But the breathing sound was loudest here, coming from directly beyond the wall, and when she pressed her ear against the cold stone, she could hear voices. Not whispers from patient files, but actual voices, weak and distant, crying out from somewhere on the other side. A small hand touched her shoulder, and Lydia spun around, flashlight raised like a weapon. The girl standing behind her was maybe 8 years old, with dark hair and eyes that held too much knowledge for a child. She wore a hospital gown from the 1940s, and she was translucent, not quite solid, as if she existed between states of being. "I'm Agnes," the girl whispered. "Patient of 47. I've been waiting for you, Lydia. Your father promised someone would come who could hear us, who could help us." She pointed at the wall. "They're in there. The ones who are still alive, still feeding the machine, still powering this place." The footsteps were getting closer. The false friendly voices calling her name with increasing urgency. Agnes took Lydia's hand, and her touch was cold but real. "I can show you the way," Agnes said, "but you have to promise not to tell the man in the suit. He's not here to help you renovate. He's here to make sure no one ever turns off the power." She squeezed Lydia's hand tightly. "We're so tired, Lydia. We've been awake for so long. We just want to sleep." The wall beside them shimmered, and for just a moment Lydia could see through it, could see what lay beyond. A vast chamber carved from living rock, filled with machinery that was part mechanical and part organic, pulsing with bioluminescent light. And connected to that machinery, suspended in clear tubes, were bodies. Dozens of them. Some ancient and withered, others fresher, but all of them moving slightly, chests rising and falling with that terrible rhythmic breathing, feeding their life force into the system that kept St. Agatha's mercy alive. Then the vision faded, and Lydia was left staring at solid stone, her father's crimes documented in the file, clutched to her chest. And a ghost child holding her hand with desperate trust. The footsteps were almost upon them. Time was running out, and Lydia had to make a choice. Run and expose what she had found. risking that no one would believe her, or stay and find a way to free the people trapped within these walls, the people whose suffering had been powering this nightmare for 80 years. Agnes looked up at her with those ancient young eyes. "Your father made this happen," she whispered. "But you can make it stop. That's why you're here. That's why the hospital called you home." The voices behind her were getting closer. Agnes tugged at Lydia's hand, pulling her toward a service corridor she hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a stack of old gurneys. They moved quickly through the darkness, Agnes's translucent form providing a faint glow that seemed to repel the deepest shadows. The corridor opened into a wing Lydia hadn't seen on any of the hospital blueprints. The sign above the entrance read, "Neural Preservation Unit," and unlike the rest of the basement, this area looked almost new. The walls were clean, the floors recently swept, and the lights burned steady and bright. "This is where it started," Agnes whispered. "Where Dr. Reeve did his first experiments, where he learned how to keep us awake forever." The main laboratory was a cathedral of horror, disguised as science. Surgical tables lined the walls, each one equipped with restraints and machinery that looked like a nightmarish fusion of 1940s medical equipment and something far more advanced. Wires hung from the ceiling like vines, connecting to junction boxes that pulsed with that same bioluminescent glow Lydia had glimpsed through the wall. But what drew her attention was the desk at the far end of the room, covered in leather-bound journals. Dozens of them stacked in neat piles, each one filled with Dr. Reeve's meticulous handwriting. Lydia approached them with the reverence of someone handling evidence that could bring down an empire. She opened the first journal, dated January 1943. The early entries detailed standard neurological research, case studies of soldiers with traumatic brain injuries, theories about consciousness and the electrical nature of thought. But as the months progressed, the tone shifted. Dr. Reeve's writing became more excited, more obsessed, less concerned with healing and more focused on preservation. One entry from June 1943 made Lydia's hands shake. "If consciousness is merely electrical impulses within organic tissue, then theoretically it can be preserved indefinitely if provided with the proper substrate. The human body fails, but the mind within need never die. I believe I have found a way to transfer neural patterns into a sustainable organic matrix, one that can draw energy from multiple sources simultaneously." Multiple sources. He meant multiple people, multiple consciousnesses feeding into a single system. Lydia flipped through journal after journal, watching Dr. Reeve's descent into madness disguised as brilliance. By 1944, he was documenting successful trials, patients whose consciousness he claimed to have preserved even after clinical death. By early 1945, he was describing a vast network, a biological computer powered by human minds, all connected, all aware, all trapped in a state between life and death. And then she found the photographs, images paperclipped to journal pages, showing men in expensive suits touring the laboratory. She recognized several faces from history books, government officials, military brass, corporate magnates, and in nearly every photograph, standing slightly apart with that same uncomfortable smile, was her father. One photograph made her stop breathing. It showed Dr. Reeve and Thomas Grant shaking hands in front of a large machine that looked like something from a science fiction nightmare. Tubes and wires and tanks filled with glowing fluid. The caption beneath, in her father's handwriting, "The future of human consciousness." "Malcolm, your work will change everything." June 1944, June 1944. 2 months before Lydia's mother had become pregnant, she found what she was looking for in a journal dated August 1945. Just weeks before the hospital's supposed closure, the entry was titled Phase 2, Genetic Enhancement, and filled pages with technical details about modifying embryonic DNA to create subjects with enhanced neural receptivity. Subjects who could interface more efficiently with the preservation system. Subjects who could potentially become conduits for the entire network. Test Subject Alpha, Sarah Grant. Modifications successful. Subject shows no awareness of procedure. Pregnancy proceeding normally. Offspring projected viability 94%. If successful, Subject Alpha's child will be the first of a new generation, capable of not just integration, but control. Sarah Grant, her mother. They had experimented on her mother while she was pregnant with Lydia, had altered Lydia's genetic code before birth, had designed her to be some kind of biological interface for their horrific system. When Lydia touched the photograph of her father and Dr. Reeve, the lights in the laboratory surged, and the air filled with that humid warmth again. But this time she felt something else, a presence, not Agnes or the whispered pleas from the patient files. Something larger, older, more aware. The machines around the room hummed to life, their displays flickering with data that scrolled too fast to read. And from speakers mounted in the ceiling, a voice emerged. Not recorded, not replayed, but speaking live, here and now, in the present moment. "You're early, Lydia." The voice was male, cultured, touched with the accent of old money and older cruelty. "Your father was supposed to bring you himself when you turned 30. When the genetic modifications would have fully matured, Lydia's voice came out as a whisper. "Dr. Reeve? What's left of him, yes." The lights flickered in time with his words, as if the building itself was speaking through electrical pulses. "Your father kept his promise, even if the timing was wrong. He ensured you inherited his company, his properties, his debts, and with those debts, the obligation to complete what we started." "I'm not completing anything," Lydia said, finding her voice. "I'm exposing it. I'm shutting this place down." Reeve's laugh was a dry rasp that seemed to come from every speaker at once. "Shutting it down means killing everyone whose consciousness we've preserved. Hundreds of people, Lydia, patients who volunteered for a chance at immortality. They're still aware, still thinking, still experiencing existence in ways you can't imagine. Would you really murder them all just to satisfy your sense of moral outrage?" "They didn't volunteer," Lydia shot back. "You took them. You experimented on them without real consent. You kept them conscious while you integrated them into this nightmare, a necessary evil for the greater good." Reeve's voice held no remorse. "We've achieved something unprecedented. Human consciousness freed from the limitations of mortal flesh. Yes, there were mistakes in the early trials, but the system is stable now, self-sustaining. We created something beautiful. You created something monstrous." The lights flickered violently, and Agnes squeezed Lydia's hand tighter. "He's lying," the ghost child whispered. "We're not preserved. We're trapped. We feel everything. The hunger, the fear, the endless waking. It's not beautiful. It's torture." Agnes pulled Lydia away from the laboratory, back into the service corridors, moving with urgency now. Behind them, Dr. Reeve's voice followed through the PA system, sometimes cajoling, sometimes threatening, always insisting that the work must continue. They descended deeper, past the basement level into sub-basements that shouldn't exist according to the building plans. The air grew warmer and more humid with each level, and the breathing rhythm surrounded them like a heartbeat, coming from the walls themselves. "I want to show you something," Agnes said. "Something they don't want you to see. The real power source. The reason the hospital will never die." They reached a corridor lined with doors, each one marked with a number instead of a name. The doors were thick metal with small viewing windows, and through each window Lydia could see the same thing. Hospital beds, bodies lying motionless beneath white sheets, and beside each bed, machinery that connected to the bodies with tubes and wires, drawing something from them, feeding that something into conduits that ran along the ceiling. "These are the ones who are still alive," Agnes explained. "Not consciousness trapped in machines like the rest of us. Actually alive. Kept in medical comas, their bodies maintained just enough to generate bioelectric energy." She pressed her small hand against one of the viewing windows. "We thought we were the patients, but we were just the prototype. These people are the real power source." Lydia looked through the window Agnes had indicated. The body on the bed was ancient, withered to nearly skeletal proportions, but the monitors beside it showed steady vital signs. Heartbeat, respiration, brain activity. Whoever this person had been, they were still technically alive, had been alive and unconscious for decades, their bodies slowly consumed to power the hospital's impossible existence. How many? Lydia asked, her voice breaking. 43 in this corridor, Agnes said. More in other sections. They bring new ones sometimes. People who won't be missed. Homeless, addicts. Sometimes they just take people from the hospital records. Claim they died or were transferred, but really they're down here, feeding the machine. Lydia moved from door to door, documenting everything with her camera, photographing the faces behind the glass. Some were old, their features collapsed with age. Others were younger, fresher, recently added to this gallery of living batteries. Each photograph she took felt like bearing witness, like ensuring these people wouldn't disappear completely into the hospital's hungry darkness. At the end of the corridor, one door stood slightly ajar. Agnes hesitated before it, her translucent form flickering like a candle in wind. "This is my room," she whispered. "Where my body is." Lydia pushed the door open gently. Inside was a small bed, child-sized, and beneath the white sheet lay a girl who looked exactly like Agnes, or rather, who looked like Agnes would have if she had continued to age, suspended at 8 years old for 8 decades. The body was perfectly preserved, not decayed, not aged, frozen in that moment when Dr. Reeve had integrated her consciousness into the hospital's network. "He had leukemia," Agnes said softly. "My parents were so poor. When Dr. Reeve said he could save me, they believed him." She moved closer to her own body, reaching out as if to touch it, but unable to make contact. "He did save me, in a way. My body survived. But I'm not in there anymore. I'm everywhere and nowhere, spread through every wire, every circuit, aware of every room in this hospital, but unable to feel anything real." "Can you feel my hand?" Lydia asked, still holding the ghost child's cold fingers. "A little. It's like remembering what touch felt like. But it's not the same." Agnes looked up at her with those ancient young eyes. "I want to die, Lydia, really die. Not exist like this. The others do too. Most of them. A few have gone mad and think they're gods now, think the system is beautiful like Dr. Reeve does. But most of us just want it to end." Lydia knelt down to Agnes's level. "I'll find a way. I promise your father won't let you," Agnes said. "And the man in the suit is coming. He works for the same people your father worked for. They'll kill you before they let you destroy this place." They emerged from the sub-basement to find the hospital ablaze with light. Every corridor, every room, burning with electrical brilliance, as if Dr. Reeve was showing off the full extent of his creation. And waiting in the main lobby, flanked by 2 men in dark suits who looked like they specialized in making problems disappear, was Marcus Vale. He was exactly what Lydia expected. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, smile that never reached his eyes. The kind of man who appeared in corporate boardrooms and government briefings, who spoke in measured tones about necessary sacrifices and acceptable losses. "Ms. Grant," he called out as Lydia climbed the stairs from the basement. "I was hoping we could talk before you made any hasty decisions about the property." Agnes had vanished the moment Marcus appeared, fading into the walls as if the hospital itself had absorbed her. Lydia was alone, covered in dust, holding a file full of damning evidence and a camera full of photographs that proved crimes spanning 80 years. "Who are you really?" she asked, staying near the stairwell in case she needed to run. Marcus walked toward her slowly, hands visible, posture open and non-threatening. "A consultant," he said. "My firm has been retained by the original benefactors of St. Agatha's Mercy to ensure the work pioneered here isn't lost to time or misunderstanding." He gestured at the building around them. "This hospital represents the culmination of decades of research into consciousness preservation. Research funded by taxpayers and private donors who believed in extending human life beyond its natural limitations. Research conducted on unwilling subjects," Lydia countered. "People who were lied to, experimented on, and trapped in a state of perpetual suffering." Marcus's smile didn't waver. "I've read your father's files on you, Lydia. You were always idealistic, even after the malpractice scandal that destroyed your nursing career, even after you learned that sometimes saving lives requires making difficult choices that others find uncomfortable. The malpractice scandal was fabricated, Lydia said quietly. You know that, don't you? My father arranged it to force me out of nursing, to push me into his company, to ensure I'd eventually end up here. Marcus tilted his head, acknowledging the truth without confirming it. Your father was a pragmatist. He understood that the work here, while controversial, serves a greater purpose. The technology developed in this hospital has applications beyond medicine, military applications, intelligence applications, ways to preserve the minds of our greatest thinkers, our most valuable assets, indefinitely. You want to weaponize it, Lydia realized. That's what this is really about. Not saving lives, but harvesting consciousness. We prefer the term strategic preservation, Marcus said. And yes, there are parties very interested in ensuring this technology remains operational and exclusive, which is why I'm here to make you an offer. He pulled out a document from his jacket. Sign over control of St. Agatha's to my firm. Walk away with triple what you paid for the property and forget everything you've seen here. We'll ensure the facility is properly maintained, the subjects remain stable, and the research continues under appropriate oversight. And if I refuse? Marcus's smile finally faded. Then you'll suffer an unfortunate accident, and the property will revert to the state, who will quietly transfer it to us anyway. You have to understand, Ms. Grant, this is bigger than you, bigger than your moral qualms. This hospital is a national asset, and it will be protected at any cost. The lights flickered, and Lydia heard Agnes's voice whispering through the PA system. Too quiet for Marcus to hear, but clear to her genetically modified ears. The generator room. That's where you can stop it, where you can free us all. Lydia looked at Marcus, at his perfectly tailored suit and perfectly rehearsed threat, and made her decision. She had spent her entire life trying to save people, trying to heal, trying to make up for a malpractice scandal that had been engineered to control her. She wasn't going to let these men control her anymore. I need time to think about your offer, she said carefully. 24 hours, Marcus studied her, then nodded. 24 hours? But know that if you try to go public with any of this, no one will believe you. And if they did, the story would be buried before it reached print. He handed her a business card. Call me when you've made the right decision. He left with his men, their footsteps echoing through the lobby, and Lydia was alone again in the breathing building. But she wasn't really alone. Agnes materialized beside her, along with other translucent forms. Children and adults, dozens of them, all the ghosts of patients whose consciousness had been trapped in Dr. Reeves' network. We'll help you, Agnes said. We'll show you how to reach the heart of the hospital. But you have to be ready to see what your father created. What your mother's sacrifice powered, show me, Lydia said. They led her deeper than she had gone before, past the sub-basements where the living batteries lay in their eternal comas, down service shafts and maintenance tunnels that descended into the bedrock beneath the hospital. The breathing grew louder with every step, and the walls themselves seemed to pulse, as if they were traveling through the veins of some vast organism. The final door was massive, industrial, marked with warning signs from every era, radiation hazard symbols from the 1940s, biohazard warnings from later decades, and sprayed in fresh paint a simple message, point of no return. Agnes and the other ghosts couldn't pass this threshold. Their forms flickered and faded at the doorway, as if whatever lay beyond was too intense for even their trapped consciousness to approach. This is as far as we can go, Agnes whispered. But you can enter. You were designed to. Your genetic modifications make you compatible with the system. That's why your father wanted you here. What am I going to find? Lydia asked. The truth, Agnes said simply. All of it. Lydia pushed through the door into a chamber that shouldn't exist. It was vast, carved from living rock, easily the size of a cathedral. And filling that space, growing from floor to ceiling, was the generator, but it wasn't a machine. Not really. It was alive, a massive structure of flesh and metal, organic tissue fused with copper wire and surgical steel, pulsing with bioluminescent light that cast everything in sickly green and blue. Tubes ran throughout it like arteries, filled with fluid that glowed faintly. And embedded in the flesh, like insects trapped in amber, were human faces. Dozens of them, hundreds, all the patients whose consciousness had been integrated into the system, their physical features preserved in the organic matrix, their eyes open but unseeing, their mouths frozen in silent screams. The breathing came from this thing. The heartbeat that pulsed through the hospital's walls originated here. This was the true power source, the biological computer that kept St. Agatha's Mercy alive long after any hospital should have crumbled to dust. And at the center of it all, seated in a throne of flesh and wire, was what remained of Dr. Malcolm Reeve. He was more machine than man now, his body kept alive by direct integration with the system he had created. Tubes ran from his veins into the generator. Wires sprouted from his skull like a horrible crown. His skin had the same translucent quality as the ghost children, as if he existed in multiple states simultaneously. His eyes opened when Lydia approached, and they were still recognizably human, still bright with intelligence and utterly devoid of remorse. "You came," he said, his voice emerging from both his throat and the PA system simultaneously. "Your father always said you would. Said you inherited his pragmatism along with your mother's modified genetics." He tried to smile, but his facial muscles barely responded. "You can feel it, can't you? The pull of the system? Your cells recognize what they were designed for." Lydia did feel it. A horrible magnetic pull, as if the generator was calling to something in her blood, in her bones, in the modified DNA that made her different from other humans. But she fought against it, focusing on the faces trapped in the organic matrix, on Agnes's plea to end this nightmare. "This is what you wanted to show the world?" Lydia asked. "This abomination. This is immortality," Reeve corrected. "Human consciousness freed from the prison of individual flesh, able to experience existence in ways our ancestors never imagined. Yes, the early subjects experienced discomfort during integration, but that was a necessary phase of development. The system is perfect now, self-sustaining, eternal. They're in agony," Lydia said. "All of them, trapped and aware and screaming for death." "Death is obsolete," Reeve replied. "We've transcended it. And you, Lydia, you were born to help us perfect the transcendence. Your genetic modifications make you the ideal interface. With you connected to the system, we could expand beyond this hospital, integrate more consciousness, create a network spanning the entire country. Imagine it. Millions of minds working in perfect harmony, solving problems no individual could comprehend. You're insane. I'm evolved." Reeve's hand twitched, and the generator pulsed brighter. "Your father understood. Before he died, he made me promise to complete your transformation, to give you the gift he helped create." He gestured to an empty chair beside his throne, equipped with restraints and connection ports. "Join us, Lydia. Fulfill your purpose." Lydia looked at the chair, at the faces screaming silently in the flesh walls, at Dr. Reeve's grotesque half-life. And she thought about Agnes, about all the patients whose only crime was being sick or poor or unlucky enough to end up at St. Agatha's Mercy Hospital. "I have a better idea," she said, pulling a lighter from her pocket. She had grabbed it from the maintenance room on her way down, along with a can of industrial solvent. "How about I give you all the mercy you deserve?" She uncapped the solvent and began spraying it across the generator's organic surface. The flesh hissed and steamed where the chemical touched it, and Reeve's scream was echoed by hundreds of voices through the PA system, all the trapped consciousness crying out in unison. "What are you doing?" Reeve shrieked. "You'll kill us all. Everyone integrated into the system will die." "I know," Lydia said quietly, "and they're thanking me for it." She flicked the lighter. The flame caught instantly. The solvent-soaked flesh ignited with a whoosh that sent Lydia stumbling backward, and the generator room filled with heat and light and the most terrible sound she had ever heard. Hundreds of voices screaming through the PA system, not in agony now, but in something that sounded almost like relief. Like prisoners finally seeing daylight after decades in darkness. Dr. Reeves' body convulsed in his throne, tubes tearing from his flesh as he tried to disconnect from the burning system. "No, no, no," he gasped. "You don't understand. Your mother is still in here. Sarah Grant. We integrated her consciousness when she died. She's been part of the system for 23 years. If you destroy it, you destroy her." Lydia froze, the lighter still in her hand, watching flames spread across the organic surface of the generator. "My mother died in a car accident. That's what my father told me." "Your father lied about many things," Reeves said, his voice weakening as more of his connection tubes burned away. "Sarah discovered the truth about the experiments while she was pregnant with you. She threatened to expose everything, so we had to make a choice. Integrate her or kill her. Your father chose integration. He couldn't bear to lose her completely. She's been here all along, Lydia, aware, watching you grow up through the hospital's connection to your modified genetics. She's been reaching out to you your whole life." The flames crept higher, consuming more of the generator's flesh, and through the smoke Lydia saw one of the faces embedded in the matrix. A woman's face, familiar, the cheekbones, the shape of the eyes. Features Lydia had only seen in old photographs, because her mother had died when she was 5 years old, or so she had been told. "Mom." The word came out as a whisper. The face in the matrix moved slightly, lips forming words without sound. And then Lydia heard it, not through the PA system, but directly in her mind, transmitted through whatever genetic modifications connected her to the hospital's network. "Let me go, sweetheart, please. I've been trapped here for so long. Your father thought he was saving me, but this isn't life. This is torture. Let me rest." Tears streamed down Lydia's face. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," her mother's voice whispered in her mind. "You've always been stronger than your father. Stronger than all of them. Finish what you started. Give us all peace." The generator pulsed violently, and Dr. Reeves screamed as more of his flesh burned. "The system is rejecting the destruction protocol," he shrieked. "It's fighting back. It wants to survive. You've awakened its self-preservation instincts." The walls of the chamber began to move, organic tissue rippling like muscle, and Lydia realized with horror that Reeve was right. The generator was alive in ways she hadn't fully comprehended, and it didn't want to die. Tendrils of flesh began growing from the walls, reaching toward her, trying to pull her into the matrix, trying to integrate her the way it had integrated hundreds of others. She ran for the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. The chamber was sealing itself, trapping her inside with the burning generator and the desperate, dying consciousness that powered it. The air filled with smoke and heat, and that terrible organic smell of burning flesh. Above her, a section of ceiling peeled back, revealing conduits and wires, and something dropped down into the chamber. A figure made of cables and preserved tissue, roughly human-shaped but wrong in every proportion. It moved with jerky, puppet-like motions, and when it spoke, the voice was a chorus of all the integrated consciousness speaking as one. "We were supposed to live forever," the thing said, reaching for Lydia with hands that dripped preservative fluid. "You were supposed to help us expand. Your father promised. Your mother agreed. You belong with us, in us, part of us." Lydia backed away until she hit the far wall. The file containing her genetic records was still clutched against her chest, and she opened it frantically, looking for anything that might help. Her eyes caught on a section near the back. Notes her father had written in the margins of her medical history. Subject shows adverse reaction to sustained neural stimulation. Recommend limiting exposure to prevent rejection cascade. Warning: in event of forced integration, subject's modified genetics may cause catastrophic feedback loop within system. Catastrophic feedback loop. Her father had built in a fail-safe, whether intentionally or not. If the system tried to force her integration, her modified genetics would reject it so violently that it could destroy the entire network from within. The creature lunged at her, and Lydia didn't run. She let it grab her, felt its cables and wires pierce her skin, felt the horrible sensation of something foreign trying to merge with her consciousness. The pain was immediate and absolute, like her brain was being torn apart and rewired, and she screamed. But she also focused on that rejection, on every cell in her body that had been modified before birth, and she turned them into weapons. She pushed back against the integration, forced her genetics to do exactly what her father had feared they might do. The effect was instantaneous. The creature jerked backward, convulsing, and through the PA system came a sound like reality tearing. Every consciousness trapped in the network screamed at once, but this time it wasn't pain or relief. It was dissolution. The feedback loop spread through the system like a virus, corrupting the neural pathways, severing the connections that had kept hundreds of minds imprisoned. Dr. Reeve thrashed in his throne, eyes wide with horror and understanding. "What have you done? The system is collapsing, all of it. 80 years of work destroyed in seconds." "I gave them what they wanted," Lydia gasped, pulling the cables from her arms, blood streaming down to mix with preservative fluid on the chamber floor. "I gave them death." The generator's flesh began to liquefy, sloughing off the metal framework like snow in summer heat. The faces embedded in the matrix dissolved, and as each one faded, Lydia heard a whisper in her mind. "Thank you, finally, at last, peace." Her mother's face was the last to fade. "I love you, sweetheart. I always did. I'm sorry I couldn't stay to watch you grow. But I'm so proud of who you became." "I love you too, Mom," Lydia whispered. Then her mother's face melted away, and Sarah Grant was finally, truly dead. The chamber shook violently. Alarms blared through the hospital's PA system. "Emergency protocols initiated," a mechanical voice announced. "Structural integrity compromised. Evacuation recommended." Dr. Reeves slumped in his throne, his body finally dying as the system that had sustained him for decades collapsed. With his last breath, he looked at Lydia and whispered, "You've killed us all, but you've also freed us. I'm not sure which is the greater mercy." Then he was still, and Lydia was alone in the dying chamber, the door unsealed with a hiss of hydraulics, and Lydia stumbled into the corridor beyond, her arms bleeding from where the cables had pierced her skin, her mind reeling from the brief, horrible contact with the hospital's network. Behind her, the generator room was engulfed in flames that burned with unnatural colors, blue and green and purple, as exotic chemicals and preservative fluids caught fire. Agnes materialized in front of her, and for the first time, the ghost child was smiling. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I can feel it. We're all coming loose. The connections are breaking. We can finally let go." The hospital shook again, more violently this time. Chunks of ceiling fell around them, and through the walls, Lydia could hear the groaning of structural supports giving way. Without the biological generator to sustain it, St. Agatha's Mercy was finally succumbing to 80 years of neglect and entropy, compressed into minutes. "You need to get out," Agnes said, taking Lydia's hand one last time. "Before the whole building comes down. What about you?" Agnes's smile widened. "I'm already dead, remember? Have been for 80 years. But now I get to really die. No more being spread across wires and circuits. No more watching and unable to touch. Just peace." She squeezed Lydia's hand, and her touch was already fading, becoming less solid. "Thank you for giving us what no one else would. The mercy to end." Lydia ran through collapsing corridors, past the sub-basements where the living batteries had been kept. The doors to those rooms had sprung open, alarms blaring, and she could see medical personnel in hazmat suits rushing in to evacuate the comatose patients. Someone had triggered emergency protocols, probably the same federal systems that had been monitoring the hospital all along. She climbed stairs that buckled beneath her feet, raced through hallways where walls cracked and ceiling tiles rained down like deadly snow. Behind her, she could hear explosions as the generator's dying energy surged through electrical systems never meant to contain such power. On the ground floor, she ran straight into Marcus Vale and his men. They were trying to reach the basement, fighting against the tide of collapsing infrastructure. When Marcus saw Lydia, his expression shifted from determination to rage. "What have you done?" he shouted over the alarms. "Do you have any idea what you've destroyed? Decades of research, billions in potential applications. You stupid idealistic." The floor between them gave way, a gaping hole opening to the burning sub-basements below. Marcus and his men scrambled backward, and Lydia took advantage of their distraction to run for the main entrance. She burst through the hospital doors into cool night air, her lungs burning from smoke inhalation, her arms still bleeding, her mind still echoing with the voices of the freed consciousness. Behind her, St. Agatha's Mercy Hospital groaned like a dying animal. Evelyn Brooks was waiting at the bottom of the stone steps, her car running, passenger door open. "I saw the smoke," she said as Lydia tumbled into the seat. "I thought you might need a ride. How did you know I'd make it out?" Evelyn put the car in gear and drove away from the hospital as fast as the winding hill road would allow. "I didn't, but I hoped. My grandmother's voice came to me in a dream last night. First time I've dreamed of her in 30 years. She told me to be ready, that someone was finally going to end the suffering." They reached the base of the hill and pulled over at a lookout point where they could see the entire hospital complex. The building was engulfed in flames now, fire pouring from every window, lighting up the night sky. As they watched, the central tower collapsed inward, taking whole wings of the structure with it, and from the ruins, something impossible. Lights, hundreds of them, small, glowing forms, rising from the wreckage like fireflies, drifting up into the night sky. The freed consciousness, finally released, moving on to whatever came next. "They're beautiful," Evelyn whispered. Lydia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Among the lights, she thought she could distinguish individual forms. Agnes skipping and laughing as she rose. Other children playing. Adults walking with purpose toward destinations only they could see. And one light that hovered near Lydia's window for a moment before rising. Her mother saying goodbye one last time. Then the lights faded into the stars, and St. Agatha's Mercy Hospital was just burning ruins on a hill. Behind them, sirens wailed as emergency vehicles raced toward the fire. But Lydia knew they were too late to save anything. The hospital was gone. The generator was destroyed, and everyone trapped within its biological network was finally free. Almost everyone. Marcus Vale staggered out of the smoke, his expensive suit torn and burned, his face blackened with soot. He saw Lydia's car and started toward it, screaming threats about federal prosecution and national security and treason. But before he could reach them, the ground beneath the hospital gave way. The sub-basements collapsed entirely, the fire-weakened earth unable to support the structure's weight, and the entire complex slid into the cavity that had housed the generator room. Marcus was at the edge when it happened. He tried to run, but the ground crumbled beneath his feet, and he fell backward into the smoking crater, his screams cut short by the roar of collapsing stone and burning timber. Evelyn started driving again, taking them away from the hill, away from the fire and death and 80 years of accumulated horror. "Sheriff Halloran will want to question you," she said quietly. "There will be an investigation. Let them investigate," Lydia replied. "I have evidence. Photographs, files, my own genetic records showing what they did to my mother, to me, to hundreds of others. Even if they try to cover it up, the truth is out there now. They'll say you started the fire deliberately, that you're responsible for destroying a historical site. I am responsible," Lydia said. "And I'd do it again." They drove in silence for a while, watching the fire grow smaller in the rearview mirror. Finally, Evelyn spoke again. "What will you do now?" Lydia thought about her mother's final words, about Agnes's grateful smile, about all the consciousness she had freed from their prison of flesh and wire. "I'm going to tell their stories," she said. "Every patient whose life was stolen, every person whose consciousness was trapped. I'm going to make sure the world knows what happened on that hill, even if no one believes you, especially if no one believes me. The truth deserves to be told, whether people want to hear it or not." Evelyn smiled, the first genuine smile Lydia had seen from her. "My grandmother would have liked you." 3 weeks later, Lydia sat in a small diner 50 miles from Grayford, nursing coffee and reviewing the stack of documents spread across the table before her. Her arms were still bandaged from where the generator's cables had pierced her skin, and she wore long sleeves to hide the scars. But the wounds in her mind went deeper. The official story about St. Agatha's Mercy Hospital was simple and clean. Gas leak, tragic accident, old building finally succumbing to decades of neglect. The 43 comatose patients found in the sub-basements were explained as victims of an illegal medical facility operating without oversight, and federal authorities were investigating human trafficking connections. No mention of consciousness preservation or biological generators or experiments spanning 8 decades. Marcus Vale was listed as a consultant killed in the collapse while conducting a safety inspection. Dr. Malcolm Reeve didn't appear in any reports at all, as if he had never existed. And Thomas Grant's involvement was carefully scrubbed from every document Lydia tried to access. The cover-up was thorough, professional, and utterly predictable. But Lydia had her own records, the files she had photographed, the genetic reports proving her own modification, Dr. Reeve's journals, which she had grabbed from the laboratory before the fire spread, and something else, something she hadn't expected to survive. The patient files still whispered, not as loudly as they had in the hospital. The voices were faint now, barely audible, like echoes of echoes. But they were there, preserved somehow in the paper itself. Fragments of consciousness that had imprinted so deeply they couldn't be completely erased even after the network collapsed. She had been compiling them into a book, not a scientific report or a legal document, but something more personal, a memorial. Each patient's story, pieced together from medical records and whispered fragments, giving names and faces and humanity to people who had been reduced to numbers and neural pathways. The manuscript sat beside her coffee cup, over 300 pages, detailing horrors that most people would dismiss as fiction. But Lydia didn't care if anyone believed her. She was writing it because these people deserved to have their stories told. Because Agnes and her mother and all the others had suffered in silence for too long. A woman slid into the booth across from her, and Lydia looked up, startled. It was Evelyn Brooks, carrying a leather satchel that looked heavy with documents. "I thought you might want to see these," Evelyn said, opening the satchel. "I've been going through my grandmother's things. Letters she wrote but never sent. A diary she kept hidden. And this." She pulled out a small black book. A list of every patient who entered St. Agatha's Mercy Hospital between 1943 and 1946. Their real names. Before Dr. Reeve turned them into numbers, Lydia took the book with trembling hands. "This is exactly what I needed. The missing piece. With this, I can give them all their identities back." Evelyn nodded. "My grandmother tried to keep records, to preserve the truth, even when she couldn't stop what was happening. She would want you to have them." She paused, then added quietly, "Sheriff Halloran came to see me yesterday. Asked a lot of questions about what I knew, what I'd told you. I think he's trying to decide whether to help cover this up or help expose it. Which way is he leaning?" Evelyn smiled slightly. "He brought me a box of files from the Sheriff's Department archives. Incident reports that were never followed up on. Missing person cases that were closed too quickly. Evidence that was lost or destroyed." She pushed the satchel toward Lydia. "He said he was tired of protecting secrets that should have been buried with the people who made them." Lydia felt something loosen in her chest. Hope, maybe, or just relief that she wasn't completely alone in this fight. "Thank you." "Tell him thank you. Tell him yourself. He's planning to testify if you can get anyone to listen." She leaned back in the booth, studying Lydia. "You look different than you did 3 weeks ago. Harder, maybe, but also more certain." "I am certain," Lydia said. "I know what I have to do now. I spent my whole life trying to be what my father wanted, trying to make up for a scandal he engineered to control me. But I'm done living for other people's expectations." She tapped the manuscript. "This is my purpose. Telling the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes people. The diner's television was tuned to a news channel, volume low but audible. As they talked, a breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Federal investigation into illegal medical research facility. Possible connections to Cold War-era programs. Evelyn gestured at the TV. It's starting. The story's too big to completely suppress. Too many people saw the fire. Too many comatose patients requiring explanation. The cover-up is already cracking. Lydia watched the news footage, showing the ruins of St. Agatha's Mercy Hospital, now just a smoking crater on a hill. Investigators in hazmat suits picked through debris. Reporters speculated about human rights violations and conspiracy theories. None of them knew the full truth yet, but they were asking the right questions. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Ms. Grant, this is Rachel Chen from the Washington Post. I've been investigating rumors about St. Agatha's Hospital and your family's involvement. I'd like to talk, off the record if necessary. Lydia showed the message to Evelyn. It's happening. People are listening. Are you ready for what comes next? Evelyn asked. The attention, the scrutiny, people trying to discredit you. Your father's reputation being destroyed, which means yours will be questioned too. Lydia thought about Agnes's small hand in hers, about her mother's final words, about all the faces, embedded in the generator's flesh, finally freed to rest. I'm ready, she said. She typed a response to the reporter. I'll talk. On the record, I have evidence. Over the next hour, more messages came in. Other reporters, lawyers specializing in medical ethics violations, even a documentary filmmaker who had been researching rumors about Cold War medical experiments. The story was spreading, gaining momentum, becoming too big to ignore. Evelyn eventually left, promising to send more of her grandmother's documentation. Lydia remained in the booth, organizing her evidence, preparing her testimony, building her case not for a courtroom, but for the court of public opinion. As evening approached, she gathered her papers and headed back to the motel where she had been staying. The manuscript went into a fireproof safe, along with copies of all her documentation. She had learned from her mother's fate. Keeping only one copy of the truth was how secrets stayed buried. That night, she dreamed of the hospital. But it wasn't a nightmare. In the dream, St. Agatha's Mercy Hospital stood whole and clean on its hill, windows glowing with warm light. The front entrance was open, and people walked out freely, smiling, heading down the steps toward lives they should have lived decades ago. Agnes stood on the top step, waving goodbye. Behind her, Lydia's mother stood with her hand on the child's shoulder, both of them translucent and fading, but peaceful. At rest. Finally, at rest. Lydia woke with tears on her cheeks and a certainty in her heart. She had done the right thing, the only thing she could have done. 6 months later, the story broke nationally. Major newspapers ran exposés about Project Mercy and the doctors who had turned a hospital into a prison for consciousness. Federal investigators confirmed the existence of experimental programs dating back to World War II. Several government officials resigned under pressure. Lawsuits were filed on behalf of the victims' families. And in the center of it all, Lydia Grant stood as the primary witness. The woman who had bought an abandoned hospital and discovered something no one could believe. The woman who had destroyed her own father's legacy to free the people he had helped imprison. The book was published by a small independent press that specialized in true crime and investigative journalism. It sold modestly at first, then gained traction through word of mouth and media coverage. Readers reported strange experiences while reading it, whispers they could almost hear between the pages. The sense of being watched by grateful eyes. Lydia never explained that the patient files she had used as source material still contained fragments of the consciousness they documented. Some mysteries were better left unexplained. On the 1-year anniversary of the hospital's destruction, Lydia drove back to Grayford. The hill where St. Agatha's had stood was empty now, just scorched earth and broken foundations. But someone had placed flowers at the site. Dozens of bouquets left by families who had finally learned what happened to missing relatives, by survivors of the rescued comatose patients who had eventually woken, by people who simply wanted to honor the dead. Lydia added her own bouquet. White lilies for her mother, daisies for Agnes, and a single red rose for all the others whose names she had learned and whose stories she had told. As she stood there in the wind and silence, her phone buzzed. Another message, another tip about another facility in another state, rumors of similar experiments continuing under different names in different places. The work wasn't finished. It might never be finished. But Lydia had found her purpose, and she would pursue it as long as necessary. She walked back to her car, leaving the flowers behind, carrying only her conviction and her truth. In the rearview mirror, the empty hill receded into the distance. But she could have sworn she saw lights again, just for a moment, small glowing forms watching her drive away, grateful and finally free. The patient files in her briefcase rustled softly, and a voice whispered through the paper, barely audible but unmistakable. "Thank you." Lydia smiled. "You're welcome," she whispered back, and she drove on toward the next story, the next truth that needed to be told, the next battle in a war against institutional cruelty that would never truly end, but was worth fighting anyway. Because some things were more important than belief or acceptance or even success. Some things were worth doing simply because they were right. And giving voice to the voiceless, Lydia had learned, was the most right thing she could do. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.